up, the immigration debate. President Obama and Mexican President Felipe Calderón are expected to announce a new plan this week to address drug violence along the U.S.-Mexico border. President Obama reportedly considering sending National Guard troops to the border region. Meantime, the ACLU and several other civil rights groups are filing a lawsuit challenging Arizona's new immigration law, which got some high-profile support this weekend from former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin.
It's time for Americans across this great country to stand up and say, we're all Arizonans now. And in clear unity, we say, Mr. President, do your job, secure our border.
The controversial measure also sparked this exchange between Senator John McCain and former Arizona Governor, now Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano, at a Senate hearing this afternoon.
Have you had a chance to review the new law that was passed by the state of Arizona?
I have not reviewed it in detail. I certainly know of it, Senator.
So you're not prepared to make a judgment on it?
As you know and are well aware, that's not the kind of law I would have signed.
Here to mix it up is our panel, Ari Melber, correspondent for The Nation magazine, and Chris Stirewalt, political editor for The Washington Examiner. Ari, let me begin here with you. What is your legal challenge to the Arizona statute? It is a law passed by the Arizona legislature, signed into law by the governor there. What is the constitutional challenge that you will assert?
Well, I mean, one of the constitutional questions you're going to hear about this is whether changing this standard and demanding that people on a reasonable suspicion standard give up papers is somehow discriminatory. Does that violate, your equal protection? Is that really the way that it should be uniformly applied to anyone without any other probable cause, just what they look like?
Well, I certainly would not have signed this law. I'm with Janet Napolitano on that, former colleague as both Attorney General and Governor, but you are challenging how that law would be implemented rather than how it's drafted then. Am I correct?
Yes, I mean, I think there are ways with regard to the legal challenges we're going to see. There are ways that people can argue that as applied, this doesn't in fact discriminate on race. And then you get into, of course, different policy questions. I think most of the opponents, though, to be clear, the courts is where this is going to end up, but most opponents say this is bad policy even if it were found constitutional.
But Chris, I'm sure you'll agree with me with this. Bad policy doesn't make it unconstitutional. Sure. You're saying implementation could, but that's a different effort. Chris, you think this law will withstand judicial scrutiny?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. But what I do know is that when you see the president even opening to the possibility of dispatching some National Guard troops to the border, and you see what's going on in the public opinion polls that say that people have reservations about the Arizona law but support it by pretty overwhelming margins, it tells me that sort of the ship is turning politically on this issue. The effort to create a lot of outrage over this was pretty successful at the beginning of the month in getting protesters out and demonstrators. But I think what we're seeing happen now is that the people who are who support a crackdown are going to get some action in Washington.
Well, look, what I think we all would agree with is that we are seeing immigration as a third rail of politics. It is a hot issue. It creates divides and very, very tough decisions, both for elected officials and for voters. And it's going to be a searing issue all the way through this November, is my prediction. I think we would all agree on that. Finally, some numbers showing more U.S. troops ending up in the hospital for mental health disorders, even more than those ending up there from injuries. In two physical injuries, in 2009, more than 17,000 people were hospitalized for mental health issues. Just over 11,000 were treated for injuries and battle wounds. It's the first time that's happened in the 15 years since the Pentagon began tracking these numbers. Chris, let me ask you, why do you think that is? Is the nature of combat changing? Are we being more sensitive to the psychological harm from being in combat? And then, tough issue for both of you, should people get the Purple Medal, Purple Heart for psychological injuries, something that has not yet been done by the Pentagon? Chris, take a shot.
I don't know that the folks I know in the military would be interested in having post-traumatic stress, Purple Hearts. I think that sort of goes against the military ethic as I'm familiar with it. As for why the numbers are higher, is it possible that the sense of lack of mission or the understanding of the purpose that they're there has something to do with it? Possibly. But it probably comes down to, more than anything else, the fact that the military has worked very hard to get people to talk about these issues and come forward. And to destigmatize them. So I suppose that the jump comes more than anything else from a sense that it's now okay to talk about.
Ari, did you agree with that analysis about why we're seeing more psychological injuries being discussed in the open?
I think that makes sense, what Chris said. If you look at the New York Times article, yes, a large part of this is reporting. We are hearing more people coming forward and saying they're having these problems, which doesn't necessarily mean that we have a higher incidence. It means we have perhaps better reporting and less stigma. We've seen that in a lot of psychological issues. You know, and the other point I'll mention is, well, what's different? The war in Afghanistan is now much longer than World War II. So what also is different is we're seeing people go back into these regions over and over, re-upped, and sometimes they may physically be able to take it, but have more mental problems.
And where do you come down on the Purple Heart issue? I mean, this is a very contentious issue within the Pentagon. Should people get the Purple Heart for psychological harm, if not a physical injury?
You know, I really don't know on that one. I'm not a doctor and I haven't served, so I really would have to listen more to the experts on that one.
Got it. All right, Ari, Chris, thank you so much.
You bet.